Let's open this session of a study session of the Pittsburg City Commission regarding requests for proposals regarding the possibility of a Pittsburg electric utility. So John and Jay, whoever wants to start us off.
Darren wanted to kind of introduce everything.
Come out of the gate swinging. Go ahead.
Commissioners, in July of 2016, we started looking at alternative energy as a initiative. Dr. Bailey and Jay's today brings us to January of 2018. We've come a long way, I wouldn't say in a short time. Basically where we are in today's process, Jay is going to walk you up how we got there and where we are and what we're getting ready to do. But I do want to acknowledge the study group that we had that's put in at least 4, if not 5 meetings. Put in a lot of time, read a lot of stuff. I passed a lot of that on to you. Today's about an open discussion about the feasibility study that we're recommending, and hopefully ask any question that you feel comfortable asking, and we'll answer them to the best of our knowledge. I have 2 members, Larry Seward and Sean Nacarado, from the study group here as well. Commissioner Munsell was on the study group, Patrick O'Brien was on the study group, and I'll turn it over to Jay and Dr. Bailey, and thanks for allowing us to do this.
We thought it was a pretty good time. We have a couple of new commissioners who probably haven't been engaged with the process we've been making with the like this process that we're going through, this electricity study work that we're doing. And we wanted to also give you some opportunity to answer any questions. So if you have any ideas, I'm just going to kind of very quickly go through some of the background, tell you where we are now and where we think we're going to go next. As Darren indicated, we really were kind of interested in looking for alternatives to energy here in Pittsburgh. Our electricity rates have risen to be a major cost increase factor in our budgets over the years. And our municipal operations are always looking at ways to reduce our costs, and alternatives were what we were looking at. We knew that the cost of alternative energy is increasing pretty dramatically, so we thought maybe we could do something with that. There was also concern with the competitiveness of our rates and just a general looking for what could we do in Pittsburgh. So we had numerous meetings over a number of years with Westar regarding upgrades, rates, potential for alternatives, and we were consistently told there really wasn't much we could do. And I think overall it's become pretty clear that that Westar, they are limited by their status as a regulated investor-owned utility. I mean, that is, they have to answer to the KCC, they have to answer to the stakeholders who are their shareholders. So, there's Westar was always willing to come to the table with us, and we had discussions. We just never felt that we were making any progress on some of the fundamental issues that we were concerned with. And a lot of that really boiled down to our long-term rates. What's going to happen to our rates in the long term? How are we going to be able to modernize our electricity grid over the long term? So these are some basic questions that we really didn't feel we were getting answers we were comfortable with from Westar. So we kept looking at what we thought. Well, we're just going to spend some real staff time and research what our alternatives are, what's out there. So we knew there are lots of cities in Kansas that have their own electrical utilities. I think there's over 100 that have electric utilities. So this is not a rocket science thing we're talking about. So we talked to some of these other cities. We also talked to Kansas Municipal Utilities Organization, Kansas Municipal Electric Agency, Kansas Power Pool. Those 2 are brokers. We talked to some consultants. We looked at the legal side, what are our options legally that we could do. We talked to how would we fund anything that we do. We talked to our bond councils. We talked to other funders, potential funders. And all of those really kind of indicated to us that we do have some options available to us. There's parameters that we would have to work within, but we do have some options. But we really needed to. We thought at this point we needed to approach our stakeholders before moving forward. Right? We felt that we were kind of approaching the limits of our capability here, and before we moved forward, we wanted to talk to the community. So we really asked a group of large electricity users to study whether and how to move forward with any electricity options. And so we started, we called an initial meeting. We met PSU in July of last year. We discussed, why we're meeting, kind of brought them up to speed with, as I'm doing with you now. Talked about, how the alternatives are decreasing, what access we had to any other regional power sources, a little bit about the technology, about the state of the market, where the electrical markets were going. And then we asked for some of their experience in this area. Now, and most of them were really pretty saw Westar as generally reliable, all right, although there was some minor concerns with that, but in general, they said, Westar served us for many years, and they were pretty happy with that. They did have some concerns about the cost. They saw the same thing we did, the rising cost over time, but they were definitely interested in moving forward with options to at least to look at what we could potentially do. So we had another meeting in October. We brought in representatives from the Kansas Power Pool and from the Kansas Municipal Energy Agency to talk about power brokers and some of those relationships, a little bit about how the energy markets work, to kind of get a little bit more education for the group so they could understand a little bit more about how they operate. We talked a little bit about municipalization in Winter Park, Florida. The reality of the matter is there haven't been too many municipalizations of electric utilities in the country. Certainly not in Kansas, and even across the country, it's been a relatively rare thing. So they talked a little bit about some of the ones that have recently municipalized, Winter Park being one of them. And so that was a little bit of an educational session for everybody. And then we had another meeting in November where we talked about questions that arose from the previous session. We had a presentation by Sunflower Electric, which is an electric cooperative. It's kind of a different approach to electrical distribution. And they had a different emphasis on things, different way of looking at how to provide energy. Looked at the goals and operations of how a cooperative works. We're definitely informed about that. We had another meeting on November 20th, where we had a presentation by an energy consultant who's in town, discussed the co-op idea, and whether or not it's a good idea to have electricity generation, what's the impact on economic development, the rates, some keeping the resources local came up as well. Those were all issues. We looked at some comparisons in the 4 states about electricity rates. All of those were things that we talked about in the last meeting. But it really became clear that there were a lot of questions that we didn't have answers to. There was a lot of information we needed to have before moving forward. There were legal questions, there were technical questions, there were financial questions, all of those things that we simply didn't have answers to, and really required a level of technical expertise that we just didn't possess. So we throw out on the table there a proposal to engage a consultant who specializes in these things to do a feasibility study. And I think we gave a copy of the feasibility study, so you can kind of see what we're looking for. We had 15 items on there in the scope of services that we were looking for that consultant to provide. And we wanted to know if and now knowing that this probably wouldn't be a cheap contract, all right, we wanted to talk to the members of the group there if they thought it was a good idea, maybe hoping that some would suggest that they would help us. That didn't happen, but we did get a strong sense from that group that it was appropriate for us to move forward with a feasibility study, and really that's where we are right now. We are looking at releasing a feasibility study this week, the one that you had in front of you, and we wanted to come to you to kind of bring you up to speed how we got here and why we're doing this, and to have you answer any questions you might have. So.
No, we don't have to make a decision tonight other than to move forward with releasing it, and then we'll get information back, and we'll come back to you at that point in time, and you have an opportunity to make some final decisions regarding the end result of the study. So.
Could you
explain the process if we was to become our own electrical utility. Well, I mean, you're putting the request for proposal before us tonight, and what's the next step on that?
Well, the proposal really will help outline that process for us. And that's really one of the things that we need to have defined for us. We have some general ideas about what it would take, but to actually dive into the legal side of it, the steps we need to take to actually become a municipal electric utility, those have to be very much more clearly defined, and that's one of the things that this proposal we're looking for.
You know, I was a member of that committee, and I asked what other cities in Kansas has done this recently, and you said there wasn't a lot.
There are a lot of cities that do have electric utilities already, but none that have converted from an investor-owned utility to their own municipal utility in a long time.
I think the guy said it was since like 1903, the last time that happened. My next question is, why did we find Winter Park, Florida, to do basically a study on what we want to do? How did you come up with Winter Park, Florida?
Actually, that was come up with the Kansas Power Pool person, Mark Chesney. He kind of brought that out as an example of one that had recently been municipalized.
And that happened in what, 2005?
I think that was the date. Yeah.
You know the cost of that process to Winter Park, Florida?
I mean, I just Googled this afternoon and that came up, what winter, yeah, so,
It was about a little over $40 million, if I remember right.
but it was over a lengthy period of time.
Yeah, I sat in all these meetings, and I didn't have that sense that you have, Jay. I had the sense that we didn't have all the questions answered. I know you had a lot of people there wanting to sell us power if we do this. But some of the conversation I had with members of this committee was, why was Westar never brought to the table and at least have their side of the story?
For that.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
We met with Westar as a city 4 times. We met with their local people, we met with their CEO, we met with their CFO. We've discussed this at length. We discussed alternative energy, we discussed local rates, we discussed their business model. So I think to the extent that the staff needed to talk to Westar, we did. As we moved on from those discussions and started talking to other people that had different models for receiving electricity and providing electricity, there are a lot of small communities that do it on their own because for whatever reason, when the large utility was, the large monopoly, if you will, was established, there was just certain places where the power didn't go. So if you were a smaller community, you had to kind of get into the business of your own, which really answers the question about why you don't have anybody since 1903 doing this. You really have the cities that are larger than Pittsburgh, the large metropolitan areas that are the users of Westar and the customers, and then you have everybody else that's kind of figured it out on their own. Pittsburgh's in that sweet spot. We talked to Westar during the study group working sessions that we did with the study group about the appropriate time to come in. And obviously, if you have Kansas Power Pool and KMEA and other people that are in this industry, to have Westar at the table didn't seem like it would be fair, as when we were meeting with Westar, we never had anybody else in the room. So the question was put to the study group, and I know you were there. What should we do? I believe the recommendation came back. Let's get Westar in here, but let's get Westar in here after we've done the feasibility study, so we have a ton of information, which we don't have currently because we're not in this business. And then we can have Westar come in and discuss the request for proposal, the feasibility study. So I don't think there was ever a decision to purposely exclude Westar from the process going forward. It was, when would Westar be included in the decision? And I think it was clear from everybody, and I've got 2 members of the group here, The general consensus was, well, what do we do at this point? That's how we left the final study group, and they said, well, why don't we go ahead, move forward with the RFP, get the feasibility study, because in that feasibility study, a host of data will come back that will answer all the questions that, we're just limited at the number of questions we can answer. And that's really the two lists that I sent each of you. Those are the questions that came back from the study group and the ones that we have amassed and the ones that Mark Chesney, who's the guy that brought up Winter Park, Florida, had been asked that he couldn't answer, and so he followed up. But the reality is, it's January of 2018. If everything goes as planned with the RFP and the feasibility study, we'll be under contract with someone to perform a feasibility study by June 1st. And that's assuming we keep to the schedule. A feasibility study will take, in my estimation, somewhere to 6 to 8 months. And the result of that is, quite frankly, a ton of information that we need about how much it would cost us to operate it, how much it would cost us to acquire it, what are our options for receiving power. All of those are decisions that are to be made later by this group and hopefully with recommendations from our study group. But and I know RJ's here. I don't think at any time RJ feels like we have snubbed them or not met with them, but there is a process, and we are deferring to the study group on how they wanted to approach that. That's why we got them together, and their recommendation was, let's don't get with Westar now. Let's move forward and get this information, and then we will get with Westar. So that's a very long answer, but I think it's appropriate that Patrick O'Brien was on it, and it looks like you've got something to add.
You know, I was at that last study session, and it was definitely the strong consensus of opinion that we move forward with this study that we're talking about doing right now, because I think we felt like it was going to give us enough information that we could ask better questions. And I think that's what it comes down to. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's what this proposal is going to tell us.
My next question is, do we have an estimated cost of this proposal to the city? We don't.
I mean, that's what the feasibility, I mean, that's what this RFP is for. Is to
They
get
will give us, and then we decide if we want to go with whoever that bidder
Right.
is. And then, at some point, the citizens will get to vote on this if we become our own municipality.
I would recommend that we wait until we get the feasibility study. And if you read the scope of work in there, one of them is the legal wranglings, if you will, of what we would have to go through to establish a utility. So having not had a city since 1903 go through this, I think we should be careful and wait and see what the experts tell us would be the proper steps to go through if we decided that establishing a utility or joining a co-op or buying power on the market. That's the whole point of the feasibility study, is so we're not guessing and giving half answers up here.
You know, I think just to address that just a little bit, Chuck, I don't think that we ever took it to the voters to sign the contract with Westar. I would assume not. I don't know.
I can't imagine.
But I can't imagine that. You know, at some point in time, we may get down to that. But I think that's a ways down the road.
I hear what you're saying, and I was happy to be part of the committee. And I was glad I heard a lot of information from experts in the field. I just was disappointed that, you know, for me, as one of the 5 that has to maybe at some point make a decision on this, I just didn't have enough information from them meetings to make an informed decision. I think maybe this, I don't know, it's a lot of money, that what I've heard it might cost, and so that's why I'm asking all these questions.
I think we need to be careful not to dig up snakes to kill them. I mean, the whole point of this is to really have a good idea, possibly,
Yeah.
what the costs will be, because it.
But I don't wanna spend a dollar to save a dime either, so, in that aspect, I guess we see what happens.
Well, if you don't have, and I agree with you, I was in all those meetings with you, there's a whole host of questions. If you don't have enough information to answer the questions that we need to ask, how are we gonna get them without doing a feasibility study?
Right. Westar could have provided some, I know you met with them, but the committee, and I guess that was the consensus. And once again, it's, I'd like to hear from Westar, before I vote on anything, but that's just my thoughts.
Well,
So
if
is-
you're patient, you will, because we're not
I'm
asking for
not-
your vote tonight.
I will be
and
patient.
we will
I
have
have
a-
been
We
patient.
will have a discussion with
Sure.
Westar before there's a vote.
Thank
So
you.
That's the process, and it's going to be followed, and
So this RFP is not we're not voting on issuing this,
I do not,
Right.
the city does not need the commission's approval to
issue
publish
RFP.
an RFP.
Okay, all righty.
We would definitely come back to you with the people that responded to the RFP and a contract to move forward if that was the case. And that's why I don't really know and don't want to give an estimate of what it would
Sure.
cost, because it's quite frankly probably going to be with to prepare you, it's probably going to be from a group that's not local, that's probably not even in Kansas, as most of the organizations in Kansas that we've met with have been very nice and explained that we actually work with Westar also, and we think it'd be inappropriate if we were out doing feasibility studies on how to possibly, go do something different than use Westar. So it's a very comprehensive, there's a time where you need to step back and ask for help, and that's what this RFP is.
Well, I wasn't on the committee and I'm new to the commission, but I am very excited about this. I think since utilities are something that everybody needs and everybody uses, that they are probably not best served by the private sector. So I hope this all works out. I'm excited to see the data.
It's 5:24. I do want to make sure that we understand there was 20 people on the study group at any given meeting. There was, I think around the holidays, we got down to about 6 or 7. It was probably Chuck and a few of the staff members, it felt like. But in the end, it was great attendance, and the people that came in and spoke to us, I thought, did a good job. I think Jay and Dr. Bailey did an excellent job of lining out some people to come in there and help us move forward so we could get to this point. So, but, we're a long way from making serious decisions that impact the taxpayers and the customers of Westar, and we know Westar is going through their own interesting times right now with the potential merger and things. So, it's just a time to get good information, and everybody's been very patient with us, and we appreciate that. And we will take this slow and methodical, and I think we're in a good place. And thanks to all the people on the committee that have committed 4 evenings so far to hang out with us and talk about electrons. With that, any other questions? If not, appreciate you letting us do this, and great job, guys.
Guys,
Thank you.
I'll have a meeting in 6 minutes if you guys are still interested.
sounds good.